Okay, great. Well, I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today for our webinar featuring the Trade Commissioner Service, part of Global Affairs Canada. My name is Phil Arthurs, the Director of Operations for Downsview Aerospace Innovation and Research. And for those of you that may not know us, we are a not-for-profit consortium of industry and academics building an aerospace innovation hub at Downsview Park and delivering initiatives to support the aerospace industry locally and pan-Canadian. Today is the fourth in DAIR's National Aerospace Partner Series of webinars. Our goal is to provide an open forum where SMEs, large companies, academics, and other organizations can hear directly from partners whose services support the aerospace industry. Our previous sessions with the Business Development Bank of Canada, the Canadian Commercial Corporation, and MyTax are all available as recordings on our dairhub.com website under events, so I'd encourage you to check those out. And our format is simple. We'll hear from our speaker for 15 minutes or so, and then we will have an open Q&A period. And just before I introduce our speaker, Uday, today, a few small housekeeping items. So our webinar will be recorded and available afterwards. The slides that are presented will also be made available to the attendees. During the presentation, I will ask that you keep your microphone on mute. However, please feel free to leave your camera on if you'd like. And during the Q&A session after the presentation, please feel free to come on camera, unmute your mic, and ask your question to Uday directly, or you may also use the Q&A function and type your question. It can be found in the top bar of the Teams app. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Uday Sequeira, Trade Commissioner in the Ontario Regional Office. And Uday has spent the past 13 years at Global Affairs Canada, and prior to that, has represented Canada overseas in various roles. So we're excited to hear from him today, and then for a great Q&A session afterwards. Uday, over to you.
Thanks, Phil, for the warm introduction, and hello, everyone. As Phil mentioned, I'm the Trade Commissioner covering aerospace, defense, and security at the Regional Office of the Trade Commissioner Service, and that regional office covers Ontario companies. Hence, as I can see, there are many Ontario companies and institutions on the line and here in person as well. So, it's great to meet some of you for the first time and to talk to some of you again and present. So some of this might be familiar to those that have worked with the Trade Commissioner Service before, and it'd be great to hear from you in terms of what your experience have been with the Trade Commissioner Service and how we can improve as well. That can be part of the Q&A. Please be kind. Okay, so to start off, for those who are not familiar with the Trade Commissioner Service, what is it? Trade Commissioner Service is an institution that's housed within Global Affairs Canada. It's a federal service that's free for Canadian companies that meet certain requirements, and we'll talk about that later in the presentation. We have a network basically wherever Canada has embassies or consulates or trade offices. In many cases, they're trade offices with trade commissioners. So you have coverage basically across the globe. The coverage is a bit patchy. We have our biggest trading partner. We have 15, 16 diplomatic missions, starting with our embassy in Washington, D.C., all the way down to a tiny kind of tech startup office in Palo Alto. And in Africa, we have maybe a little bit less in comparison, but you're always going to be able to find some sort of service. And, that service the Trade Commissioner Service can provide starts really at home, and we'll get to that. Besides our global network and a series of trade commissioners in Ottawa within Global Affairs Canada's headquarters, we also have 6 offices across Canada. What we offer, and this is comes back to the kind of the title of this presentation, we offer, besides funding, which we'll talk about, it's that network across the globe, getting those kind of on the ground market intelligence, or finding out who's the right people to talk to. because we have people on our local international innovation program. It's a little bit more specific and not specifically housed within the TCS, but so we can talk about that. And then there's this kind of additional business support. There are some startups on the line. So to mention, we have our Canadian Tech Accelerators. These are, you hear accelerator and you think, okay, that's for me to grow in Canada. But actually, because the are global, them across the globe, and I'll talk a bit about that as well. Okay, so just quickly, to talk about how we work with companies. We don't work with every Canadian company. We work with companies that we call clients. It's just to differentiate companies that don't have an export focus from those that do. And so we have some basic requirements, that companies are part of the business community. Pretty much all the companies here are part of that community, have meaningful economic ties to Canada. And that just basically means that some manufacturing, R&D business in Canada. We do have companies that approach the TCS that may have, for example, ownership that's Canadian, but that's not enough. We need some sort of presence and jobs that are based in Canada. And the most important for us is have a demonstrated capacity for internationalization. And demonstrated is, we can nuance that a bit. It doesn't have to be that you're already exporting, or in many cases, there are companies that don't think they're exporting, but actually are. For example, we always like to use the term exporting overseas, but the United States is an export market, and we can't forget that. And so I meet companies all the time that tell me, oh, we don't export, we just sell to Canada and the US. And they still qualify, right? And we can still help them. So once we've qualified a company as a client, and that happens at the regional office, we'll talk about that, maybe a little bit more in the Q&A. But we have 4 main services that we provide companies. The preparation for international markets service is essentially ensuring that companies that are kind of starting off and trying to understand which markets they should export to. Again, they may export it to the US or parts of Europe, but they're looking at other markets. We help fine-tune that export strategy. Often there are companies that see what's in the news and think that that's the right market for them. But a success may occur in a market that's not the ones that are the popular ones, for example. It really needs to be tailored. And the regional offices help a lot with that. The next is market potential assessment. That's kind of our term for actually getting into the market. So companies know where they want to go. They've done their research. They're trying to understand further how that market works for them. That's where we, the regional offices, sometimes we have in-house experience, but essentially that's where we transfer that relationship over to our global network. And then the person is dealing with a local trade commissioner, or maybe a Canadian-based trade commissioner that's in that embassy or diplomatic mission, and they can provide further nuance. Again, this is all about that preparation for that market. And it's, again, fine-tuning and making sure that despite what the regional office might say, we are not in that market, and there may be local conditions, there may be some intel that's relevant to, say, the political situation that we won't have here. And that's that kind of insight, I think, is very valuable for companies to get that in advance. Moving on, so, they've done their research, they know where they're going, they've gotten that tailored kind of information from the diplomatic mission and our overseas trade commissioners, and they're looking to drill down who's the right people to talk to. That's where we have not just our network, but qualified contacts, people that we've vetted in some way. And often you'll find that our trade commissioners abroad have actually built up these relationships to the point where they're kind of friends with these people. They know the right people in the procurement departments, and at least the good trade commissioners should be doing that, is forming those kind of relationships where they can very easily pick up the phone, talk to that person and say, hey, I got a great Canadian company for you. And then, the part where it's kind of the grab all service for, unfortunately, there are times where problems occur. And the TCS where some tries to assist. So, the easiest example, especially for manufacturing companies, is where something gets held up at customs and you're not sure why, and the documentation may be in a foreign language. This is where, again, the Trade Commissioner Service can be a vital component to helping you break that logjam. And a little bit of a kind of a word cloud in what we do and what we have available. This can be, again, looking at those key contacts, looking at which markets, reducing risks. And this is something where, as a trade commissioner based here with experience both in the HQ and at our missions abroad, I'm hoping that the advice that I can provide companies like yourselves or institutions that might be looking at markets abroad is that if I can save you some money, it's just the same as making you some money. You don't want to go in long, kind of in a rabbit hole somewhere because you've heard something, kind of that hot tip in the industry, and it ends up being a dead end. So we want to avoid that as well. If we can save you some money, we think we're helping you as well. So, and this can be, in fact, one of the vital roles we play is vetting opportunities. So you may come across a commercial opportunity that seems very legitimate, but you want a second set of eyes on it. You want to have kind of a second pass at that opportunity. TCS is there for that. In fact, I've seen trade commissioners kind of call their local chambers of commerce, make phone calls to the contact people on, say, sometimes even an official looking document looks like it's produced by the local government. They're calling people and they can find out if a document is real or not. And we've seen sophisticated scams with very legitimate looking documents. We've also seen the converse, which is sometimes it looks like an email that's totally random from like a Gmail or a Yahoo account, but it happens to be someone who's the chief of staff or a minister in a country. It happens. And we recommend always, you see something that looks interesting, send it our way. So, just kind of talking about how we're structured, we have those 6 offices across Canada. I think there's folks on the line, mostly Ontario companies, but with these 6 offices, you can see by the different colors what those offices cover. So we have one in Vancouver, Calgary, Winnipeg, which is our smallest office, right next to Toronto, which is our biggest office, and an office in Montreal, and office in Halifax. Each have kind of hubs with 3 staff there. And we actually have a satellite office in Ottawa as well, which is actually, I'm Ottawa based, and I'm part of that satellite office. So we have people in these areas where they kind of have a geographic focus as well. Most trade commissioners, have a sectoral focus. I cover aerospace and defense for the province. There may be someone in Kitchener-Waterloo that covers, say, fintech or financial banking services for the province. But they also have that ability to quickly do something in person on the ground in that area. And I deal with companies in Eastern Ontario all the time that are kind of outside my sector. But I think for the majority of this crowd, you'd be dealing with me in, say, the aerospace capacity. But for those that may not be familiar with their local, say you're with one of the, you're in a jurisdiction outside of Ontario, I'm happy to connect you with my colleague that covers aerospace in those regional offices. Sir, back there. So just a little bit about how we help. We help from the very small to the very big. On the kind of smaller side, we're really helping you get to that point of exporting. I mentioned earlier on that we're looking at determining your demonstrated capacity for internationalization. But the reality is that there may be a great product, a great service that companies have that could be exported. And it's great to start having those conversations with the Trade Commissioner Service early on, especially the regional offices, because we're in Canada, we're part of this ecosystem, and we can help you kind of kickstart your exporting. We do see some companies reach out to the Trade Commissioner Service through our global network. And there are some caveats to that, which I can talk about in the Q&As, especially if you have some experience in that, but I can leave that to that point. But there are, we always recommend coming to the regional offices first. On the experienced exporter side, I believe there are some representatives of larger companies here online. You still can find benefit from the TCS. We sometimes find that larger companies may not think of the TCS. They may just think of us as, oh, you're my link to government, right? We need the government to help us, whether it's the political side, which we don't actually have. TCS has very little sway on, you know, we're providing advice to our political masters, but we don't influence in that way. But we do have the ability to use the mission network in a way where sometimes our ambassadors may get involved on a very kind of sticky issue in that problem-solving arena. So, you know, again, think of us. But yeah, along the way, here are some of our partners. I haven't mentioned DAIR, but we should probably fix that. And you know, again, that's part of the cloud of the ecosystem in Ontario. And I'm sure many of you have dealt with portions of this ecosystem, where there's federal, provincial, municipal, the NGO side. There's different components that can assist you along the way. Okay, let's get to the funding portion. Here we go. Global Affairs Canada, along with the National Research Council, have a program called Can Export. The purpose of this program is to help different components of the Canadian economy with their exporting needs. So we have an SME program, an innovation program that also works for companies. There's a Can Export Associations programs for NGOs, and there's our Can Export Community Investments program. Now, my presentation really focuses on the SME and innovation portion of Can Export, but for the just quickly on the associations and community investment side, because I believe there are representatives of, again, associations and municipalities. On the association side, we are looking at national associations. I'm sure you can think of some, including on the aerospace side, but they have to have a kind of a national focus. So if you're kind of provincially focused, you would not be eligible for the Can Export Association's funding, but it is a way, if you're national and you haven't heard of this program before, get in touch with me. I can give you a little bit more of a primer on that. Can Export Community Investments are specifically for municipalities to look at FDI attraction. So this is a great program that I'm not the expert on, but definitely a program where you're looking to attract investment. You want to make those trips. You want to maybe even have a delegation of investors coming to your municipality. This program is a great way to get some funding for that. Okay, so moving on. Actually, I think I have my slides a little bit out of order, but I'm going to start with the Can Export SME program. So this is our funding program to help small and medium-sized enterprises, and I'll see the eligibility requirements in a second, help them with their exporting needs. The goal is for locations where, looking at foreign markets where you don't have a lot of sales, and there's a specific definition for that. I think your sales should be under 100,000 K or under 100K in sales, or under 10% of your total sales. That's domestic and international. And so with this program, you have to apply, and you know it's still government. You know, the Trade Commissioner Service tries to work like business, but in the end, it's a grant program within government, so you have to be aware of that and the kind of the time it takes and the steps required. You apply with a program with a project. If that project is approved, you can get up to $50,000 of funding for a $100,000 project. It's a one-to-one cost sharing program. It may be a contribution, it may a grant or a contribution, or it may be where you have to submit your receipts and you get reimbursed after the fact. That's a decision that's made by the Can Export team back in HQ in Ottawa. And just quickly, it says, the funding cycle is April 1st to March 31st, which is the government of Canada's fiscal year. You can apply after April 1st for a project within that time frame. You can also apply for a multi-year project. Just be aware that your funding will come in tranches per year, per our fiscal year. Eligibility, basically our definition of SMEs under 500 FTEs and under $100 million of annual revenue. Actually, there's a floor of that too. You have to have some revenue coming in, so 100K is the minimum. And then of course, just being incorporated, or an LLP, or cooperative, and have a CR business number. Pretty low bar for essentially registering in the system, so you can put in an application, and then they'll check the team will check the other requirements. What does a project look like? We use the term projects. It sometimes confuses people because they think the project needs to be something new, but your project is just your application before it gets approved and after it gets approved. So that's just our terminology. Sorry if it's confusing, but we're really looking at new markets. So it can be existing products, services, but for a market that you essentially have not tapped into abroad. Now, when we say markets, usually a market is a country, okay? There are a few exceptions. They're up on the screen. You can apply to up to 5 markets within a project. And again, people get a little bit confused about this. They think, all my target markets have to be in one area of the world. Otherwise, it looks like I'm too scattershot, et cetera. I'm not focused. That's not true. You can apply for 5 very diverse markets, or you can apply to a very concentrated group of markets. Like, for example, you could say you can choose the 4 markets within the United States plus Mexico. That's 5. And that's one type of project. Or you could pick ones from different regions because you're kind of using a hub and spoke model of your engagement in those markets. That works too. We do recommend, and this is a service that we provide. It's not a hard and fast rule that we can always provide it, but if you have an application draft that you're putting together is Can Export SME application, you can send it to if we're working with a trade commissioner covering another sector, for example, the industrial equipment Trade Commissioner Greg Rust, who's also within our office, or I believe there might be someone that's looking to move from automotive to aerospace within the group here. You may be working with Kurt DeVries within our office. These are 2 great trade commissioners that can also help you with your Can Export application. A little bit about what's eligible. Basically, when you're going abroad and looking at business development, that's eligible. Of course, there's some specifics, and I recommend that you look through the Can Export Applicant Guide, which is available online. It has a lot of kind of examples of, is this acceptable? Is this acceptable? But essentially, you're going to a trade show. A trade show. These are eligible activities that you could incorporate into that project, that application that you'd want to send in. For marketing tools as well. You marketing tools for a Can Export project. It has to be something new, and that's something you'll see written in applicant guide over and over. This can't be for your existing business operations. This is not a way of just kind of funding your core business. You're going to have a business development team, maybe even your C-suite heading over for a trip. That's fine. It's just that the activities have to be related to those new markets. And also for any marketing tools, they have to be new. You cannot ask for translation for English or French. They have to be for kind of a local language. You can look at developing, say, something that's maybe in English but tailored to a market, because the information is specific to that market and not for your kind of your core business, maybe in Canada or the market. Partnerships with a partner abroad. Again, we're always focusing on the export market, so the funding is a little bit richer, I guess, than the CanExport SME side. There's again, so $100,000 maximum. No minimum this time. CanExport SME does have a minimum floor of $20,000. This one has no minimum, and it's a 75/25 cost share. So you can get up to $75,000 of funding, and this would be for you to be able to travel abroad again to meet those partners in person, maybe even doing that preliminary R&D together that shows that there's possibility of working together with that partner. That could be part of your CanExport innovation application. I'll be honest, I've seen lots of CanExport SME applications. I haven't actually looked through a CanExport application. So if you are looking to put one together, give me some notice. Send me your drafts as early as possible. Companies where I go back and forth, where they send me kind of a framework of an application, and we build it up. I know I'm not going to be writing your application, but I can give you feedback pretty early on. I met a company recently. We had one trade show in one area of the world, and after my conversation, preliminary, they had just kind of a sketch. After my conversation, we said, "Oh, we're redoing our application. Like, we're gonna build this up again." But I know that the next iteration I see will be more on point and more in depth, and I can give more feedback. So to the program, these are really market accelerator programs, especially for companies in certain areas. We've helped companies in many different ways and created partnerships. Where you're getting a chance to be in specific markets. I think I'll put up a little map there. It shows where we are. But 12, I believe it's 12 offices across 8 markets. And you would apply again to one of these CTA programs. So you really have to be sure you're looking at that market. And so, for example, if you're looking at Germany, for kind of the, this is again speaking to maybe one person online, but looking at the auto side, you'd be looking at Germany. But some companies here might be thinking of themselves as purely aerospace companies, but you also have that might be relevant. And I would recommend going to the Canadian Tech Accelerator page so that you can see what's kind of the upcoming tech accelerators that are looking to onboard companies, and then you can kind of choose an application or a location that you want to make an application for. Yeah, I think that's it. I don't know if that was 15 minutes, but I'm ready for some questions.
Well, thanks very much. I didn't have a clock on, so we'll be good there. And thanks so much for the presentation. I know kind of a lot of different topics kind of raised, and a lot of interesting kind of things that we can dive into with the Q&A. So I'd encourage anyone online who might want to come on and ask their question directly, or if you want to use the Q&A function, please feel free to do so. And just as people are kind of doing that, I did want to just one quick question, maybe Uday, and on specifically on the SMEs, you're talking about the one-to-one contribution. Is that for the SME cash, or can it be in-kind contribution as well when the SME's portion for a project?
Thanks, Phil. For the question, cash, it's a cash contribution. So you're looking at getting that money in advance, or you're getting it reimbursed after the fact. But I don't believe there's any in-kind contribution. I can double check that though, because I think that there might be people interested in that. So, but as far as I'm aware, you're basically getting a check cut at the end, or you're getting a check at the get-go.
Okay, great. And Nick, I think I see your hand up.
Check 1 2. Could you guys hear me? There we go. Hello, Uday. Thank you for the presentation. That was fantastic. Hello, Phil. Good to see you. So quick question. I mean, from my seat at the Trillium Network for Advanced Manufacturing, I often connect with companies and I'll ask them the question, hey, have you thought about going international? And the response I often get is, oh, we're not there yet. Or, oh, well, that's not for us. Or that's too big. Or they think it's not for them. Can you arm me with some key messages that I can bring to them, say, actually, you are ready and here's why?
That's an excellent question. So I'm happy to share with you kind of some messages that you might, or maybe more in depth, but generally it really depends on what they're looking to offer. If you see something that's more say cutting edge, and they're looking at patents internationally just to protect themselves, we have the ability to help very early on with companies that, yeah, they might not be thinking about exporting, but we might be able to say, actually, here are some places where there's a great fit. So the messaging, besides telling them that they should talk to the Trade Commissioner Service through the regional offices, because we talk to very small companies that we basically sometimes turn away to say, you need to work with, say, the Trillium Network, or work with kind of say BDC and get some loans and build up. So we do, say to some companies, you're really early on, but especially those innovative companies, that's the ones that we can actually go through our CTA program, understand that maybe there's a market for you or maybe you want to be in the Silicon Valley. Like, those are places where we can help. So yeah, I think essentially the answer should be maybe have a preliminary conversation with the Trade Commissioner Service and understand how they can help, and maybe talk us up a bit. And I'm happy to participate with alongside you with them, so that I can be a silent observer and understand the company a little bit, and then jump in and say, actually, that's great. I have a few ideas that we can josh around.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nick and Uday. I'm just kind of looking. Spiro, I think you have your hand up. So if you want to ask your question.
Good afternoon. I'm Spiro Kakoutis with DAIR, the manager of workforce development. I just have a question on slide 8 under the skills development. It says export skills training. Can you kind of elaborate a little bit? What does that actually mean, or what does it entail?
You've got me on my own presentation, so I better go back and look. But let me see, slide 8.
Slide 8.
So, we do have webinars. So the Trade Commissioner Service has webinars that we put together for exploring different markets. So that would be what we consider expert skills training. So what I recommend for everyone on the line, if you haven't done so already, and this probably should have been step number 1, if I were to put together a manual for companies to work with the TCS, is that go to tradecommissioner.gc.ca, sign up to the My TCS platform. There's information available there, and you can click off sectors that would be relevant to you, so that you can receive email blasts basically on events that are taking place. So some of these are pretty targeted and can say, okay, how do you protect your intellectual property in India, for example, or like these are the challenges faced due to the instability in this market, right? So there are a variety of these kind of email blasts and webinars that we put together.
Great, thanks, Uday. And I know that a question came in from Joan at Burger. So looking at what's the approximate turnaround time for the application process?
Thanks, and they're very relevant. The standard, I believe, is 60 days for a turnaround time. So it doesn't always have to be that long. I mean, it could be longer, depending on when you're applying. So let's kind of maybe go through that cycle a bit. The government fiscal year is April 1st to March 31st. However, the Can Export SME program opens well before April 1st. It is ready for projects, so your applications, usually in January or February. So, you go and check the Can Export website, it will tell you when, hopefully it will give you a date. But if there's no date, you will see that it's either saying we're going to be opening soon or we are now open for applications. So, taking another step back from that, probably when you're looking at our fiscal year, which may not match with your fiscal year, but you kind of have to work with our fiscal year a bit. You're looking at activities that fall within that fiscal year. If you start looking at that in November, December, alongside me or a trade commissioner that you're working with within our regional office, we're able to fine tune that application a bit. Then you wait for the portal to open. You've already made sure you have your business number and everything recognized, so there's no issue there. And then you put in your project into the system. And sometimes, what we may share with you, like for example, I can share maybe through Phil, we can share the list of questions within the Can Export SME program for the 2023-2024 cycle. It may not be the same for the next cycle. There'll be some small changes, but overall you can get a sense of what an application looks like, so you can prepare alongside me so that once you put it into the system, it is good to go, right? Now, any assistance I provide you doesn't actually help with actually getting an approval. Like I can't rubber stamp an approval, right? I can give you my best advice. In the end, once you put it into the portal, it becomes a government application and it goes into a black box process in HQ, and they kind of look at the gamut of applications and to make decisions. So that's a long-winded way of saying the standard is 60 days. Yeah, hope that answers the question.
That's great. Thanks, Uday. And I think we're going back to Nick. Yeah, of course. As many questions as you'd like, Nick. Back to you.
Thanks, Phil. The question I actually asked was the second one I came up with. The first question I wanted to ask was just a kind of a clarifier on risk. You can offer assistance on risk. In general, my experience has been Ontario businesses are very risk averse. What sorts of specific risk aversion can you provide?
So, we can't drag a company to export, right? Like, we can, sometimes we do meet those companies and we say, hey, this is great. I'm so happy to meet you. You should be exporting, right? That happens. But we can't like get the companies export. But if a company is looking at markets, like for example, they're looking at the Middle East, right? Many Canadian companies may look at Saudi Arabia as the right location, or the UAE, right? So they see Saudi Arabia as that big market with lots of money. You see the videos of the cities being built on the West Coast and so there's probably lots of airports, right? There's lots being done in aviation. There might be even innovation hubs that they're building. So there's a lot happening. We can kind of fine tune and say, okay, you're looking at Saudi Arabia, but actually we have some specific opportunities related to Bahrain or Kuwait. We actually think this might be your best starting points. I'll be honest, I guess I was biased after being posted in Saudi Arabia, but I was there during a challenging time between our two countries. That's still a bit ongoing. There's still some challenges for Canadian companies in terms of doing business in Saudi Arabia. Of course, Canadian companies still work in Saudi Arabia. So, I mean, this is an example where, we can fine tune where you're looking and make sure that you're not going into what might be a risky market where for maybe another company it isn't risky, or another company with a different flag might not be risky. Again, other risk mitigation measures is really, it comes down to the knowledge of the specific market that the local trade commissioners can provide, right? So, and again, vetting opportunities, as I mentioned. I've seen companies commit money. So, you're talking about risk averse, but I have seen Ontario-based companies commit money to what's essentially a scam. It looks really legitimate. You see documents with kind of scans of something with a wax seal from a foreign government, and there's banking information requested. And I've even got into back and forth discussions with companies where they've said, no, but we checked the website, and you see a very legitimate looking website that is fake, right? It's not a government website, but they're clicking on it, it looks real, right? It would be like seeing something that's a government in Canada website that says Canada website. You might see something. And so we help with that in terms of making sure that even the people they're talking to are the right people. Also, when there's commercial issues that arise, now we can't intervene in commercial disputes, but we can also assist with local service providers. So getting some vetted list of local lawyers, or say tax professionals, that we have a list through our missions that would be relevant. Even distributors, for example, we usually through our mission network have vetted distributors. So those are, I guess, in some ways of mitigating risk once the company has an idea of which markets it's looking at.
The biggest risk you can mitigate is, pardon me, is that of the unknown.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Thanks, Nick. And from Stephen in the chat, a couple of questions. So if a business has done their due diligence in market research and knows where to export the goods or service, does TCS support Canadian businesses creating entities digitally, virtually, or physically in those international markets?
Great, thanks. Thanks, Stephen, for the question. So basically for a company that's done its due diligence, we don't support in terms of because that's essentially ensuring that you have a legal entity, et cetera. We would send you in the direction of a service provider that's vetted. So we don't help in that way. We might put you in touch with the local Chamber of Commerce, where you can get a little bit more, more information that you can gather. And I see the second part of your question in terms of eligible expenses.
I think maybe even on the innovation program, maybe some examples of those expenses as well, because I know you touched on some of the SME expenses, right? So that'd be great.
Absolutely. For the Can Export Innovation Program, actually a lot of the expenses, there's a lot of overlap. Again, I don't have the list memorized. Probably should have put a list of eligible activities. We can take a look at the applicant guide together if you're interested in a Can Export Innovation Program. But again, there's a lot of overlap. And I guess one of my tips and tricks is that you may be traveling for under one program, but you can obviously conduct activities in the other that are relevant to the other, right? So it might be difficult to put together two applications for each because maybe you're a little bit thin on the business development or you're a little bit thin on the R&D partnership, but you can still conduct those activities. But in the end, if any companies are interested on the innovation side, happy to look through the applicant guide together with you. And maybe we can provide those links to interested parties.
Yeah, that'll be great. Thanks, Uday, and to Stephen for the question. And maybe to just and I know we're coming just about 10 minutes, so I encourage anyone else come online, ask your question, or use the chat function. but maybe to kind of expand upon Stephen's question and the funding. Can you talk a little bit about stacking and the potential? Is that okay for an SME perhaps making use of one of the programs, and if there's an opportunity to stack with other programs to support as well? Maybe can you just speak to that?
Absolutely. Thanks for that. Essentially, when it comes to stacking, I believe the stacking limit is 50% for federal funding. It's not stacked with provincial funding, so you can combine funding from different levels of government. As well, actually, what I've always recommended to companies is the 1-2 of the Ontario government's kind of great organization on trade events, plus the Can Export SME program for funding. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Ministry of Economic Development, Jobs and Trade. I think I'm missing a C in there, but basically Commerce Trade. So basically, this Ministry of Trade organizes trade missions abroad, and that's one kind of a way of gaining that knowledge of that trade mission, building together a program, also maybe getting some funding on the Ontario side, and using Can Export SME, the SME program.
Okay, great. Do we have any other questions? I'm kind of looking at the chat function and the Q&A function. So it seems like we might be coming to a close. So I might call one last call for any questions. Okay, so there we go. I'm looking at so you mentioned that the funding for Can Export SME 1-to-1 funding may be provided in two ways. Funding before project starts and funding after the project is completed with receipts. Is there a way that's determined for a given project?
Thanks, Stephen. This is a bit of that black box process I was talking about, where HQ makes that determination. Generally, there are companies that have received multiple years of Can Export SME funding. They've always demonstrated that, for example, they've met, not only have they put together a great application, they've also executed on their application. There's some commercial successes that have arisen out of that. That's not a requirement, but it is a good sign. And they've spent 80% of the funding that they've received, which is important. So that's to kind of be in good standing. So a company that does that 3 years in a row, I think I'd be willing to bet they're more likely to get a contribution beforehand as opposed to having to claim receipts get funding afterwards through receipts. So that's kind of an indicator, but overall it really depends on, again, even the government Canada's fiscal situation can come into play. So we can, and the amount of funding that's available. I think there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, but in the end, I think companies that build a track record are more likely to get funding ahead of time than have to claim it afterwards. Hope that answers your question.
Great. Thank you so much. And just kind of noting that we're just kind of a few minutes before 4:30. I think I'm going to thank you, Uday, and really appreciate the information you provided here today. And I want to remind everyone the recorded presentation and the presentation itself will be made available. So please look for that. We'll also, of course, have Uday's contact information shared, or us at DAIR as well. Happy to connect and discuss different opportunities. I have to say we're quite excited to continue our work with the Trade Commissioner Service and you, Uday, as we move forward. Thank you again to all of you for being with us, and Uday for your time. And I will remind everyone, please stay tuned for the next in our series of webinars as we'll continue this knowledge sharing and information sharing. And so with that, I'll say thank you one more time. Have a great evening, and thank you, Uday.